I started recording, but feel free to wait however long you want, Christian.
Okay, I think we wait 1 or 2 more minutes until we are more people, and then we can start. Okay, we are already over time, so I think we can start. Let's come to our first topic on the agenda, introduction of new faces on the call. Is there anyone who hasn't been on the call yet? Or does everyone already knows everyone?
Is Dave Grove new? I know that we know Dave, but he might be new to the call. I'm not sure.
I was on the call 2 weeks ago.
My bad.
That's okay.
Okay, perfect. So no new faces. Then we can go to the next point. Does anyone have any notable changes or updates that he wants to share with the group?
Tyson, Container Factory SPI. You're on mute.
Yes, sorry. So Container Factory SPI was merged in. We'll be merging or submitting a PR for a Mesos implementation of that, I'll be looking for Ben and Jen Crosley to give feedback on building out a cube version of the Container Factory SPI. But basically, it will allow you to build out a way to delegate container instantiation to resource managers like Mesos or Kubernetes.
Okay, is this already merged?
Yes, the Container Factory part is, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Anything else notable that has been changed in the last 2 weeks? Okay, I don't think so. Then we can go to our topics. The first topic here is the update on the controller work and optimizations and investigations. I think Markus can start here with some general findings on the throughput.
Yeah, that's real quick. We were just profiling controller in a multi-core environments, and it was pretty obvious that there's thread contention. There was a lot of thread contention, even stuff that you wouldn't think that causing a contention, but there was. So there were a couple of pull requests from Christian and me, essentially getting rid of those contentions. Most notably, one is still open, which is the cache. Does cause contentions today. I think that's about to be merged, and the other one was that UUID generation, which is apparently something well known on the JVM causing contentions, but that's fixed now as well. So I think we improved on that side.
Okay, that's perfect. Are all these fixes already merged, or are they still open for requests?
Yeah, most of them are merged, except the caching change.
Okay. Perfect. Then Vadim, I think you can tell something about logging impact on the throughput of the system.
That's right. So Martin and I, we've been working on the logging part of the controller. So no, we've been basically working on increasing throughput on the controller, and we have figured out that the logging of the controller, it takes lots of throughput. So it's about like factor 4 of our throughput is getting. So like if you don't have the logging, you can get about like, I don't know, I'm just saying a number. So it's like 13 K requests per second, but without the logging, you can get like 40. So the problem was that, so we have basically observed two problems. The first one is the logging backend that we use. We use log4j, and we need to replace it with logback. And another problem is that we simply we simply have too many log entries, and we need to reduce them. And I have sent maybe half an hour ago, I sent out an email asking for feedback about changing the way we emit the metrics to, let's say, to the standard way, sending it out to statsd. Yeah, so basically that's the short update of the things that's the short update in that field.
Something to add to this is that there is a pull request that is being worked by Sundeep. He initially wanted to add tracing support through Zipkin. And now he's working to change the libraries from Zipkin to Open Tracing. And I hope, actually that's our intent, to be able to use this tracing library to sample some requests and understand the performance of the system in this way.
Yeah, I have seen that pull requests, but I think that we have to differentiate the metric part and the tracing. For the metric, I think that it would make sense, for example, if you need a counter, to say the number of failures in the invoker. So I think that we need to have a certain implementation in that place. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for the update. Then James, okay, you are on the call. Can you tell us something about the findings on the memory consumption, please?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been recently doing some profiling on with my changes, which involve removing creating a data type that does not contain the code property. So when we invoke an action, we go out to the database and download the entire action, and we don't save the code property that we download in our action data type. It's essentially the work, and the profiling that I've been doing has shown an improvement for actions that are already cached, which is basically what I've expected in the first place. Currently, there's no improvement when the action isn't cached, because we're still downloading all the code property there, instead of just saving it in the cache without the code property. So I've noticed that when the action isn't cached, we go from about 50 megabytes of used heap to about 500 megabytes of used heap that's invoking a 30 megabyte zipped action. So right now I'm trying to figure out where all that heap usage is going to. But we can get rid of that by turning all the code properties into attachments. That way we don't have to fetch the code every time we reach out to get the action. But that's another piece of the work that I have yet to get to. I think that pretty much sums it up. I just need to clean up my code a little bit for dropping the code property from the data type before we can get that merged in, and then I can start doing the attachment work. Any questions on that one?
Okay, sounds great. Then the next point on the list is the Akka clustering. I think there was a lot of discussion between Vadim and Tyson. Can you give us a short update, please?
Yeah, short update is that so basically we will introduce the Akka clustering in order to scale out the controller, the number of controller instances, and we made an agreement that we will not make it default. But by default, it will be false, and if you need to enable it, you will enable it. And so the reason for that is that Tyson at Druggers, they have made some tests on the Mesos side, and there is some work which needs to be done in order to enable it there. So that's it.
Okay.
I do have a generic. Can't see me. Just a generic question about the Akka clustering. I've noticed that we're using Redis to manage shared state in a PR in the Invoker. So how do we decide when to use Redis for shared state versus Akka clustering?
I'm not sure if we really use Redis for shared state.
Right.
It's a PR open to use it. So that's what I'm trying to decide, like, when should we choose one or the other, and should we have consistency? Because we use Redis also in the alarms for HA. So I'm just curious, basically.
Maybe I can chime in on that. The pull request open is to have Invoker IDs be dynamically assigned. I think that's the one you're referring to. And that's pretty much latency insensitive. Don't care if it takes 100 milliseconds or a second. You're right in noting that we are using a different mechanism to replicate state between the controllers. There isn't, to be honest, there isn't really a rule to do one or the other. It's, I think, for now mainly a concern of not standing up a Redis which is able to handle too much of load. But honestly, there's no thumb rule to that.
Sure. It's just from an operational standpoint. If we look at if I've got to run a Redis cluster and Akka cluster, it's just that's two pieces that are kind of overlap in their functionality that have got to be maintained and managed separately. They have different rules about how you cluster Redis versus how you cluster Akka. So just long term, it'd be ideal to get that to a consistent, mechanism for that.
Yeah, I will also plus one to what you just said, Ben, on the operational aspect, because now we're going to introduce some component that is going to be required for the data plane. Without it, it just won't work. Just wondering if we can make it optional, even if we, like, maybe some people don't care if a new controller starts or with the exact same ID or the Invoker with the exact same ID.
It is. Isn't it optional? I think the implementation itself is optional.
Right.
We need to look into if setting up Redis is optional, but I think the implementation, if you provide, if you hard code the ID yourself into the configuration, I think it doesn't talk to Redis at all.
Right. That's right in the PR right now, is that it's optional. And we probably could actually, I think Tyson has suggested using Zookeeper instead. We could, I think we're committed to having Zookeeper on a persistence score. We could probably code up the ID acquisition as a Zookeeper transaction. It's just sort of more cumbersome. But again, it's on a slow pass. We don't care.
Okay. I did forget we already have Zookeeper, so that would be the third way.
Yeah. Right. And so I think, the Redis is mainly just a way to make some progress so we can get going on the kube side with the daemon sets. And it is optional, as Marcus said. and we could do it with Zookeeper instead. And maybe that's the path we should go for there, because I think we're committed to having Zookeeper because of Kafka.
So why do we think having a consistent or reusing the same ID for the invoker is going to help? Because we plan to, like when the new invoker comes up, we plan to keep track of the actions that are currently running, and while the container restarts, is going to resume to those actions. So if it were not to do this, and each invoker that would come up would come with a different ID, or would use some combination of the host IP, let's say, because there's one invoker per host, what is the impact if this feature wouldn't be in?
I think the sole reason today is we have the load balancer works on a indexed sequence of invokers. The algorithm is based on doing certain step sizes between the indices to reduce collisions, stuff like that. So it's certainly dependent on how the load balancer works today. That might change in the future. But as of today, you need a unique integer ID, preferably increasing in a +1 in the step size of 1 for it to work as it's intended to work.
Thank you, Marcus. Okay, and I'm thinking
you're right. In theory, with a different load balancer, you don't care about the ID of the invoker, but today, unfortunately, we do.
Okay, and for instance, if we just use the IP address and convert that to a number, or just use the IP address and then give an index in the controller or in the load balancer for that IP, let's say 10.0.0.1 gets 1, then 10.0.0.3 gets 2, and so forth. And then the load balancer simply keeps track. I guess I'm just trying to play a case for not introducing another dependency if we don't need to.
I think you just basically described how the mapping works in the PR from UUID or invoker, from UUID to numeric ID. It basically takes whatever you pass in as UUID. It could be an IP, it could be a host name, and it just maps that to a numeric ID. The reason it uses Redis to do that is because you can have more than one controller, more than one, these two PRs are related, right? Once you can scale out controllers, now you have to share. The load balancer has to know that mapping, and they have to keep the mapping consistent across controller restarts, or otherwise you're going to end up remapping and orphaning things.
Okay, so then can we assume that once Akka clustering is going to be enabled by default and we're all comfortable with it, then that could also take care of this?
That was my original question, actually, is I'm curious why Redis versus Akka clustering in this case.
Right. I guess part of it was the Akka clustering wasn't there. And the other thing is that we realized, Marcus and I realized yesterday that since we've externalized the state, we don't actually have to talk to the controller. The invokers can just talk to the external store directly. So the Akka cluster is not going to involve the invokers. So we'd have to go back to sending a message to the controller to get to the state for the ID assignment.
Yeah, I think what Dave is saying is there isn't really, as I said before, there isn't really a design behind using the different, versions of externalized or replicated shared state. There just isn't right now, and as you know, that we can probably get away with just one of them. Although I'd claim that the pull request opened by Dave is simple enough to not be too harmful. As I said, it's optional anyway, so you can keep hard coding it. It's also quite convenient that Redis just has this notion of an atomic incrementing counter, whereas we'd have to figure out a way on how to do this with the controllers. Plus, the cluster today does only span the controllers. It doesn't span the invokers. And I don't think, as of today, we do want to introduce a cluster spanning everything, just because we don't have enough knowledge and experience with Akka clustering to be able to say, okay, let's put this on 200 machines and see how it goes. that sounds a little bit more dangerous than doing it the way we do now. And eventually in the future we can probably revisit that and conclude on one clustering solution.
One question I have on this while we're on this topic, just quickly, is what I haven't followed in the PR is whether there is accommodation for if you are using the dynamic ID generation and the mapping stored in Redis. If your invoker generates an ID and then it gets mapped to a specific topic by this mapping, is it possible currently for the topic to get orphaned by a restart where the invoker generates a new ID and it gets mapped to a new topic? I didn't follow exactly how that's resolved at this point.
Right. So go ahead, Mark. Okay, sorry. The PR doesn't really do anything special about that. So it's already the case that if an invoker goes unhealthy and offline, the topic gets orphaned, and someone has to deal with that. And okay. So what this trade, so if your invoker starts out with a new ID, it will get assigned a new topic, and that the old topic will be marked as offline, and eventually, we have to deal with that somehow. I don't know how this is.
Right. The invoker either has to maintain the same UUID, right? The new one needs to have the same as the old one, or you have to pass in this invoker assigned ID, which is just like the old numeric integer. So you either have to maintain, if you don't want to orphan topics, you either have to still maintain that integer ID for invoker, or have a stable UUID that's the same even when a new invoker comes up.
Right. Do you have a mechanism for maintaining that ID?
Sorry. We are running a little bit out of time, and I think it's a very good discussion, but I think we should move it to the agenda of next week. Otherwise, we are running out of time and the items of this week don't take place today. Is it okay to take it on the agenda? All right. Is that okay for everyone?
Yep.
Yep. We can just compare the dev list.
Yeah, dev list.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks a lot. Then we can move to the next topic. It's the design proposal for the Logstore SPI from Tyson.
So I don't have a lot to discuss here. That I've tried to circulate it on the dev list. I mostly wanted to see if there's any questions. I know Jeremiah's we had some discussion about this, and so I guess briefly, just to recap my email that I sent to the dev list, where the Logstore API covers 3 aspects of logging. One of them is enabling the use of log drivers at the Docker run commands for starting containers. Another one is for collecting logs after a activation is processed. And then another one is retrieving logs for API calls that are interested in getting activation details or activation logs explicitly. And so I think there's a lot of combinations involved or possible by doing this. The one that I've implemented in the pull request is a kind of simplistic log driver version, which says I'm collecting logs externally and the APIs don't have any access to the logs. And then a Splunk extension of that, which is I'm collecting logs externally and there's a retrieval mechanism for fetching them out from Splunk. One thing I did want to mention was that there's some implications here with how logs are emitted from containers. And so to actually leverage this, there may need to be work done on the action containers logging mechanism. So for example, if you have a container that logs a stream of activations being processed in it, then if you're using Splunk or some other syslog or whatever log store, you'll just see a stream of those, and you won't necessarily have a way to identify which log events are associated with which activations. And so one of the things that we're also working on is a separate pull request for enhancing the logging output from action containers, so that if you are using an external log store, you have a way to correlate which activations go with which logs. So that's the basic summary. And does anybody have any questions or comments?
I guess I have. I think we briefly discussed as well. I think it looks all good, and I think it's a great idea to open up the log driver to people, and it's just natural in the environment that we are in. The only concern I had with the design, and I think Jeremiah might have brought it up as well, is the log retrieval bit, where you need to essentially re-implement what Splunk gives you. You need to re-implement whatever the backend might be able to give you. So it might be.
What do you mean by re-implement?
Well, the retrieval is I use the activation API in OpenWhisk as of today, and as I understood it, it interfaces with Splunk and then tries to get the logs out of Splunk and give them to me in the same format as we do today.
Well, it gets them out of Splunk, but by using the Splunk API, for example. So it's more of a wrapping and not a re-implementation.
I think we mean the same thing. We need to wrap every single API that might be out there, and the set of options, the set of operations that we support on those APIs will always be smaller than the set of operations the original API from, say, Splunk gives you.
Yeah. So it's a question of whether you care to kind of prolong the functionality of the CLI and the API. If you want to prolong that, you have a mechanism for doing that. If you don't care, it's easy to you don't have to do anything.
Yeah, I was wondering if we should make this part of the discussion, because it's one of those things where we say if we put it in now, somebody will have to greatly explain why he's removing it in the future, and if we don't put it in the first place, it's just not there. So it might be worthwhile to open the discussion right now, whether we say, if you want to externalize the logs, they are externalized and that's it. And OpenWhisk doesn't care.
And the hazard there is that using the CLI, you cannot fetch the logs. Right.
Yeah, they will get.
That's a short version.
Yeah, they will get.
Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the what we need to work is with the user experience, right? To satisfy that need. If the user needs logs, maybe the API or the CLI gives you back enough information, or a URL or a browser where you can go to this other system or this other API to manage the logs and do more useful things than today. Just to recap, logs are good on the CLI just because that's the only thing that we have as a user, right? But if you can give me a nice web UI with a search, and I type ahead and searching for, give me the actions for these, give me the logs for this action that happened yesterday from 3 a.m. to 4 a.m., right? That might be a better user experience, and people may not miss the thing that we have today. So we need to look into maybe deprecating or moving to a different V2 API for certain components. So that we just need to have the discussion. So just want to put the seed out there that, like Marcus was saying, that that the users may benefit of just going to the place where the logs are and the logging system and the monitoring system than what they have today.
Yeah, I think just a couple of quick points. One is that part of the PR is to put in a placeholder message for the case, like if you collect logs and you're trying to direct your users somewhere, you can put a message in. That's in the PR. And the other thing is, I think in our case, there's kind of a question about, so if you have a UI, let's say like Splunk, that there's a question of whether you actually want to expose that UI directly to users, or whether your users would, even know how to cope with that, because it's a different system that operates completely differently, and it's really a question of user experience and what your users are going to be capable or expected to do for dealing with those fetching of logs.
Same idea here for operators. So we need to a way of for the operator to put whatever value we want to give that end user and flow it through from the back end and be configurable, right? We might just put our logs into Elasticsearch, but we're not going to give them an Elasticsearch API, right? We're going to give them a, I don't know, ibm.com/functions your logs, right? Websites, or maybe it's specific to their account.
One comment from my side. I think that we need to distinguish between two user experience, two different user experience. So the first, if that you run your system like since 1 year and you want to find a particular log entries in order to debug, and the second one is that if you're developing something, and if you use a console, so it's really good to see a quick feedback from your logs just to pull for your activations. I think that both use cases are valid, and I think that it would be better to keep as it is now. I mean, to still print the logs to the consoles.
One question, Tyson, is your use case to, because you just mentioned that, is the use case on your side that you're planning to do with Splunk, is it just storage of logs?
Yes.
Or is it having the users be able to use a more sophisticated search engine to crawl logs?
Yeah, so to start with, it's just to store logs.
Okay.
Ideally, we want to make it an awesome experience that you can, do complex queries with your logs. But, like you mentioned, we don't want to rebuild the Splunk UI. But having some simple ability to drill down into your activation history and logs and some simple filtering, that kind of thing. Yeah.
I see. Okay, in some way that then differs from the use case we have in mind, where we really want to surface the backend API of that search system, the front-end API of that search system, basically to the user and tell them, go there, your logs are there, use the more elaborate search system there, and don't bother with those smallish things that you have in our CI. So that it's important to understand the different points of view there.
Yep.
Yeah, and then like Vadim said, the idea of having a cache or the most recent activations logs around, maybe we can store them in a logs only database or Redis or some cache. Like we cache enough to satisfy the immediate things that happen like in the last few minutes, versus you want to see logs from like yesterday or 2 days ago. It's two different user experience, I think.
And do we already have that? Do the logs flow through Kafka before they land in CacheDB or whatever? Like, could you just look back in Kafka a little bit from a controller API and say, look, here's the logs for the most recent X activations, even though they're stored, long term somewhere else?
Kafka may be a good place to store, but they don't do today. They don't flow to Kafka.
So what's exposed in the PR is the ability to use log drivers, and once you're using log drivers, there's no components in OpenWhisk involved. So really, I mean, if the question is whether or not at all you want to expose logs to the CLI, and I think if the answer is yes, doing any work to store them somewhere locally or temporarily or duplicated outside of the log storage system is probably going to be a lot more work than just writing the minimal API to get a specific set of logs for a specific activation that you could use to hit your log store. I mean, that's debatable, obviously, but I think when you start talking about like having to duplicate log storage versus duplicating the API interaction with the log storage system, it seems like it's going to be much less work to just invoke an API to fetch the logs for a specific activation.
Perfectly. I think we got the most important points. And because of the time, we should move to the next topic in our agenda. Sorry for disturbing this discussion. Yes, but we are short in time. So I think we should move to the work on runtimes from Carlos.
Me. So I was the one delay in the meeting. Let me share my screen. I have some notes here. Yeah, this should be okay. So yeah, this is just a short intro, and then we can continue the discussions always in the mailing list or Slack. Which screen am I sharing?
Runtimes and kinds.
Yeah. So so I've been working on refactoring and helping with our drivers builds and our deployment related to runtimes, and also looking at some requirements that we have gotten on updating some of the runtimes and kinds. So just wanted to level set of when we refer to runtimes and kind. This is kind of me trying to have definitions of this type of thing. So a runtime is where the action runs. Usually this is the Docker container where your action is running. Where a kind is in the system, we use it in the CLI. We use it in where we store the actions, where it's a metadata field with the action that associates the action with a type of usually it's a language and its version. But when it gets invoked, it's how we map that action to a runtime. So in this case, I give the example of Node.js column 6. So what the proposal is that for OpenWhisk, Apache OpenWhisk, as a baseline, as an upstream, we try for our best, and I know we have different versions for different languages, but my proposal moving forward into the future is that we concentrate on a base implementation of the architecture on the major version. So we have a Node.js 6 and a Node.js 8, and those are two runtimes that we maintain, that we update, and the idea is like there's no changes in we have seen by experience, we have seen changes in the proxy or the implementation of the runtime on minor versions, and also we don't want to do like breaking changes if we have Node.js 6.9 or 6.10 or 6.11. There's no changes in the controller and the invoker or the different components of OpenWhisk just for that. Where we introduce Node.js 8, we might introduce some optimization things, or we may need to do something different for that language. So the goal is as much as possible to maintain the versions at the major version, and then keep them current and up to date with either security patches or features and things like that. And everything we have seen so far by experience is we don't change the invoker or the controller just because there's updates inside those runtimes. And even today we support Docker containers. So for the high level view is we want to maintain at this level, these are the runtimes. I think this is the summary of this. So it's a simple upgrade path for a downstream, and also a simple path for a downstream or an operator like us, some of us, to take that as a base and extend it, right? And offer your own runtime with your own changes. So I'll talk at least one instance of an implementation of downstream. In our case, is the IBM one. So this is how it would look like. We're going to split the runtimes into different repositories. So we're going to do it at least for the beginning, because we're up to 37 repos in Apache. We might be the group with the most repos in Apache org. I'm surprised that Infra haven't noticed. So yesterday I requested the Java. I started with Java, but we want to have one per version. And basically these repositories, this is where the Docker images are going to be produced and maintained. They're going to be published, and they're going to be mapped to a kind. So we're going to have the Action 6 Node.js, and for the ones that we already have created for backwards compatibility, and leaving everything that I can the same. So there's no breaking changes, and everything is transparent to everybody that is doing different type of deployments, Ansible, Kubernetes, Mesos. So I'm not going to change the name of the image for Node.js 6. I'm going to leave it the same. But for the new ones, we might need to. I think we started with a new convention of Action Node.js V8, and then we're going to have by major versions the places where we already have a minor version, like for example Swift 3.1. We're going to keep what we have for compatibility. But for example, for Swift version 4, which it came out, we're going to do a Swift a Swift 4, and then as Swift 4 updates come out, Swift 4.1 or 4.11, we're going to keep the same kind and update the runtime and version the runtime. I think that's the next version, the next thing I'm going to talk about.
Is there a typo on the Java V9?
I think this should be Action.
Right.
Okay. All right. Just want to make sure. Okay.
There was a lot of copy pasting happening.
As far as the versioning, are you planning to version by different tags on the Docker images, or are you planning to actually change the name of the Docker image to version?
I'll get to that.
Okay.
I think I closed my window. Let's see. So it's going to be a Git source tag. I think I'm not going to make this in 10 minutes. Downstream. So this is just an example of how a downstream, in our case IBM, we're going to offer a kind Node.js-IBM. Probably we're going to maintain also the vanilla one. So we do have our users may choose the vanilla. I call it vanilla, but it's the upstream, the OpenWhisk one, open source one, or the Node.js IBM one, 8. I haven't worked on these ones yet, but we're going to offer, this is just a reference implementation how operator will work. The thing is we're going to use tags to tag the image. So we have a Node.js 6 action in open source, and it's 100. So who was asking the question?
That was me. Thank you.
So we're not going to change the name of the image. We're going to have a tag, and that's 1100, and it's released, and it contains, let's say, a version. I guess this one is the version today, 6.9.1. Every repo will post them to Travis. And I did for the repo, so I maintain the same way of building it. How would this look like going forward is, proposal is for OpenWhisk to be more vanilla and more base. I think on one of the meetings, I think it was Drago, maybe it was Ben, mentioned it from Red Hat, saying that maybe the OpenWhisk ones should have less things in it, and then let the operator extend it with their specific things that they need to add. So for example, what we're thinking for Node.js 8 is that the OpenWhisk image runtime for Node 8, it only contains one NPM package, for example. OpenWhisk, the NPM library. I was debating of included it or not included. I think it's useful to include it. But for example, in the IBM one, we want to offer some IBM NPM packages. So we don't want to put them in the open source one. So for example, the IBM DB2 package is one that we're going to add. So if we have a customer that wants to use OpenWhisk and wants to use DB2 or -DB, then they can use the IBM runtime, which is just an extension of the open source one plus the IBM npm packages and so on. But they'll be updated and current. So as OpenWhisk open source validates new versions of Node, we're going to update the kind, and then we'll pick it up from there.
Carlos, back to what you just mentioned. So I'm assuming you have a Node.js repo, and then you have a Node.js IBM repo that would depend on the Node.js one?
We're going to do it through images. So we're going to extend it through images, so Docker images. So it'll be like from OpenWhisk image, and then we extend it. But James, in our case in IBM, yeah, we'll have a repo that produces our image and a repo that produces the open source images. So it will be two repos, and okay. I currently have them already, and then they're working.
Maybe one quick comment while we're at this slide, Carlos, is that maybe it would be nice to let the community also weigh in on the common modules that they want to see in OpenWhisk. Just a quick example. I know it's part of the OpenWhisk package request or request promise, but assuming that wasn't the case, probably the community would just vote to have that one by default.
Yeah, I was going to say that, like, I agree with having minimal in the open source one, but maybe not as minimal as just the OpenWhisk package. So something though, some smaller number, much smaller number.
Yeah. That's something that we need to discuss on what goes in and why, right? But we have to take into account that it will affect a lot of people, right? If request does a major change and we want to pick it up, what do we do at that point?
Right.
So I've been thinking of, like, there's ways to fix it, but I wanted to start simple, right? With nothing, I have this conversation what to add versus here's the list of all the things that I want to add, and then see what we remove, right? So it's better to start clean. So yeah, I agree. Request promise, like there's like handful, right, of npm packages that are they're almost like de facto standard. That you mean, Dragos?
Yes.
Yeah.
And from a downstream standpoint, I will let you know, like in my case, for example, at Red Hat, we would build every Docker image from source, and we wouldn't consume the upstream OpenWhisk Docker image at all. We wouldn't extend it. We would build our own that basically has to have the proxy code in it, but otherwise it'd be based on a different OS, and it'd be different, it would be different from the ground up, the Docker image would be. So you don't have to support that use case. We can handle that, but that's just a heads up.
Yep.
Yeah. In the open source image.
I did the same for IBM. I copied the proxy. So that's what I've been looking into the next phase of how do we make the proxy code more common so we can take it from one place and we maintain it in one place. But sometimes it's building the image is also more efficient of less layers. So that's why I'm thinking. So when I say extended, it's in the meaning of sentiment, right? I bet you didn't write the proxy code. I've been looking into rewriting the proxy code to make it faster, more efficient. But I think some other people may also want to benefit from that, right? Yeah. So this is just proposals and conversations. So this is not anything official. It's just to get feedback like that, right? Like you guys are giving. And I know that we're running out of time. But in terms of and I'm going to share these notes. Is how do we version these things, like the tags? Somebody was asking the versions is the first version is going to be 1.0.0. What will be the next version? 1.1.0, So I know semantic version is maybe a hell to decide, but I think this is like kind of basic rules or basic guidelines saying that if we updated the minor version of the node, let's say that we only updated a patch version of an npm package or the patch version of the Node.js version, maybe we only update the patch. But if there's a minor version for the language from going to 6.12 to 6.13, then we update the minor version, or if there's an npm package that updates the minor version, when we update the minor version. So some type of common sense, but it will be maintained at version 1, major version, because that's it. That's the API between the runtime and the invoker. This is just like in a scenario of how a kind will be upgraded. So let's say that we support 8.6 and we want to move to 8.7.3. How do we do that, right? So we want to do the work or any fixes or any patches in open source, and then benefit from that in for every downstream, not just IBM, but any downstreams that benefit from that patch or that minor update. And then so it's basically just a sequence of events, like let's do it in open source, validate in open source, validate it with the community, and then downstreams we can release it, and then downstreams can use it or not release it, but it's in open source. So that's the work I've been doing with the runtimes. I post this to the mailing list, and I've been already creating some repos and doing the work to move the content of the main repo to this repo, like incubator OpenWhisk runtime Java, but keeping the history. That's why it took me a little time of moving the code, but keeping the history. So the next step for this will be something like going to the main OpenWhisk, removing the code that I just moved here, and then the Docker file will say from the place in Docker Hub where this thing is. So for example, for now I'm putting in, this is just work in progress. I put it into my thing, but when they enable Travis, which I open the defect, it'll be there. So I'll keep the mailing list posted as I make progress. And in terms of using the repo is the same. It's the same for those type of things. So I think that's enough for runtimes.
Okay, thanks a lot, Carlos, for the presentation. I think because we are running out of time, we only have 7 minutes, and we have still 2 topics on the agenda. We should move the questions to this offline. The 2 last topics are a demo of Docker for Mac from Carlos and a short update on release process, also from Carlos and Matt. What do you think? What's more important? What should we handle today?
Well, I think we definitely need to get a moderator for next call and Apache the next logistics in terms of serverless comp. Get that solidified before people start leaving.
Okay, we can do that first and then handle the last topic. Who wants to be the moderator next time? Maybe a non-IBMer?
I'm going to be traveling, so I don't think I'll be here next time.
I'm going to be at the serverless conf.
All right. If no other non-IBMers gonna sign up, I can do it again. Tyson here.
Thanks a lot, Tyson.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that we're gonna be missing a handful of people from this call, so we just expect low attendance.
Yeah.
Okay, then we can move to the last topic for the last 5 minutes. What do you want to handle, Carlos?
I don't know.
The release process or the demo of Docker for Mac?
Maybe the release process.
Okay, perfect.
I started working on it. Let me show another set of slides for that. Which one I'm releasing? So yeah, I think I have 5 minutes. I didn't have much to cover on this one. So there's a lot of, we can spend a full day talking about Apache releases, Apache Foundation releases. So just to do a few clarifications is when we talk about a release, or usually when we talk about a release on Apache Foundation, we're talking about a source release. And basically this is just giving you like very high level summary. There's a ton of pages in the website that you can read about all the legal things and the ramifications and things like that. But I'm going to give you my own personal short version of it. So And source release is source code released under the ASF, which is the Apache Software Foundation, and distributed from the ASF server. So it needs to meet the legal requirements, which is it's a whole chapter into itself, and it needs to go through the ASF release process. There's also a different term which some people call binaries, or some people call them convenient binaries. But the first one is what ASFs consider as a release. And this is what also we need to do for getting graduated from out of incubator, be able to do releases, follow the release process. So we're in training mode right now under the incubation PMC. So we have to do it with their incubator PMC, and we have a PPMC, a Potlink PMC. So we have to do a couple of, usually the open source projects under Apache, they do a couple of these, and when the incubator sees that the community or the projects can handle them by themselves, then this is a criteria that is satisfied for graduating, and then we can do the releases on ourselves with the PMC when we do that. That could be the end of it. That could be the end of the releasing software on the Apache Software Foundation. Is you take the source code, you make sure it's legal, it's functional, it has a version, and you put it on the ASS server, and then that's the end of the discussion. But I know that the community, and actually myself, would like to have also convenient binaries. I think in the last meeting, I think Tyson was talking about having some interfaces, jar files posted into Maven. So that's an example of a convenient binary, but it needs to be taken out of, this needs to be happening after you have a release, after you have an OpenWhisk 1.0.0 TGZ already voted, release, and posted in ASS server. Then somebody or some entity or some process or we at the community can take that source code and compile it or build it and then put it in a public place as a convenience of people maybe grabbing that one. But officially, anyone that wants to see the source code, wants to get a source code, they can get the source release. So here's some examples. I know other open source Apache projects, they post into Maven. I think that's one of the things that Tyson wanted to have, is like if we can take the source code and compile some jar files or some Java binaries or Scala binaries and post them into some central public place, and then everybody can benefit of that compiled binary. Also, we have NPM packages like the OpenWhisk library in the SDK. And then we have our Docker images, right? We can take the source, build the image, and then post that image in some public registry. So that would be considered also a convenient binary. So I just wanted to clarify that, because there's conversations in the mailing list and the wiki saying, oh, this is the process that we have to follow. Apache already has a process, so we just need to follow it and then discuss what are the type of things that we want to do about convenient binaries. And I think that's what the conversation have been happening, but we have not talked about source releases. Any questions so far before I move to kind of a summary of what the process looks like? No. Okay. So the process, this is based on experience on me working on other Apache projects like Cordova. Introducing a little bit of the incubation into it. Basically, in the mailing list, we discuss what do we want to release. We have a discussion in the mailing list saying that, yeah, this is the code that we want to release. Or somebody says, oh wait, there's a critical bug that I think we should put in the next release, right? We're talking about the next release. Or is not stable, or there's a big fix. It needs to be something critical, because we can always do releases, right? We can pick up this bug in the next release. So it's just a conversation between the community and the committers and the contributors. Then after everybody agrees, like this is good time or to release something, then we have to build the artifact. We have to do a checksum, produce a checksum, sign it. and run some tool to check that all the licenses are okay from the last release and so on, and then put it in a staging server in the ASF where they have a location. Then we go to a vote to vote on that artifact, and then people will download it and check that it has the license headers, it has the license file, that they can install it, they can deploy it, and it different criteria. But we vote on it in the mailing list. Typically what we give is 72 hours. So that's why it's also a long process. Like minimum, we have to give a chance everybody around the world to veto, right? So if they have a problem with the release, they can stop the process. So 72 hours, about 3 days. Once the vote passes in the dev mailing list, then since we're not graduated, we have to go to the incubator mailing list and then tell them, hey, we want to do a release. Please, this is a vote. Here's the artifact. That is the candidate. And then the PMC and the incubators, we have to have binding votes from them. I believe 3 is the minimum, plus ones. And then once they do the voting and they pass, we close the vote with all this. There's a lot of emails going on back and forth. For those of you that have not experienced this, it's quite a little bit painful, but it's a process. We take that artifact and we publish it, and then we announce it with whatever means we think it's a good way of announcing it. Different mailing lists, like our dev list, the incubator mailing list, that there's a release of the artifact, and we in Cordova we do a blog, so we can use Twitter and things like that. It's a normal process that everybody knows that there's a new release. So that's my very, very short summary on the process. Then we can discuss of what do we consider an OpenWhisk release. I would like to make this as you can see, this is a very complex process. So I want to streamline it as much as possible, so we can say that when we do these type of releases, we can release a 1.0.0 for OpenWhisk. So OpenWhisk can be 1.0.0, and it could be just a suite of components or subcomponents. So it's one artifact, and then when you open that artifact, you will see the source code for the whatever components we want to include in that release, and maybe a manifest file. So for 1.0.0, the first release, this might be a table that we put inside the README when we release the TGC, and also creating a repo that is for release purposes and tooling and keeping track of these things. So this is how something will look like of the components of OpenWhisk 1.0.0. It has a controller, it has an invoker, it has a CLI, it has a different runtimes, it has JavaScript SDK, it has its associated version, it has where that component came from, the Git and the source control, and then what hash or tag that source control came from. So people can reproduce the binary if they want to from source. So that's the idea. And I think so far, these are the type of things, the minimum of a stable release that we can say is included. And as we do releases 1.1 and 1.2, 1.3, we can add more components, whatever components we, the community, decide to name. I think I'm missing a Docker skeleton here, which is included. So we can add more. We have a ton of repos, so we can add like a kube deploy component, right? Could be a component that we release for and versioned, or all the SDK to CF SDK and other type of things. So this is my attempt to explain the release process and OpenWhisk releases.
Okay.
Comments or questions? Useful or not useful?
So Carlos.
Carlos.
So Carlos had one question. So I've seen other Apache projects create a separate repo to help manage the process and automate it.
I do that.
Is that something that we're going to do as well?
Yes. Okay. Yes, because I, as a release manager, and by the way, any in the community, and usually we share the happiness of being a release manager, of driving this, right? We need a person, a focal point that drives the release from beginning to end and makes that announcement. And usually we get a lot of volunteers in other but that release manager benefits of having automation tools, scripts that basically sign a checksums and do git clones and do the TGZ and redo it again with release candidates. So I can take a few scripts from Apache Cordova, but it's basically that process of signing, git cloning, and packaging and those type of things.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Carlos. I think that presentation was really good. We are at the end of our meeting. Sorry for the bad time management from my side, but thank you for attending, everyone. Have a nice day.
Time management was rather good.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.